Throughout history, the boundaries of justice have been drawn with terrifying methods. Some ended the pain within minutes, while others turned into horrifying torture that lasted for days. Some were carried out publicly to deter others, while others were executed in silence. So what were the most spine-chilling punishments of the past? Some were so gruesome that you won't believe they actually happened. If you've liked the video and subscribed to our channel, let's dive into the shocking visuals of these dreadful methods.
One of the most terrifying torture devices of medieval Europe, the rack, would stretch the victim's limbs, dislocating their joints. It became widespread in England during the 15th century. The most ruthless form of fear, the Judas cradle, was used in the Middle Ages to extract confessions. It forced the victim to sit on a sharp pyramid, leaving them in agonizing pain. The brazen bull was a horrifying execution method invented in ancient Greece. The victim was locked inside a hollow bronze bull and burned alive over a fire, meeting a gruesome and agonizing death. Rat torture was inflicted by trapping a hungry rat on the victim's body, preventing its escape. In its desperate attempt to survive, the rat would gnaw through the flesh, searching for a way out. The tongue tearer was a brutal torture device designed to tightly grip and rip out the tongue with scorching hot metal pincers. It silenced the victim forever. The breaking wheel was a ruthless torture device used to shatter the victim's limbs. The condemned would either be tied to the wheel or thrown onto it, crushing their bones in a gruesome display of brutality. The thumbscrew was a torture device designed to crush a prisoner's fingers between two metal bars, shattering the bones. Spiked versions pierced the skin, inflicting even more excruciating pain. The Iron Maiden was a coffin-like torture device, lined with sharp spikes on the inside. When the victim was placed inside and the door was shut, the spikes pierced their body, leading to a slow and agonizing death. In the Middle Ages, those accused of witchcraft or heresy were tied to a stake and burned alive. However, most perished from suffocation due to the smoke before the flames consumed them. The boiling punishment was often inflicted on counterfeiters. Victims were either thrown into a boiling cauldron or placed in cold water that was gradually heated, leading to a slow and agonizing death. Crucifixion was an execution method in which prisoners were nailed or tied by their hands and feet to a cross, leading to a slow and agonizing death. Impalement was a horrifying execution method in which criminals or enemies were forced onto a sharp stake and left to die. Vlad the Impaler frequently used this gruesome technique to instill fear in his enemies. In medieval England, traitors were hanged, drawn, and quartered, a brutal execution method. Guy Fawkes was among those who suffered this horrific fate in 1606. In the wheel torture punishment, criminals had their bones shattered before being tied to a wooden wheel and left to die in agony. Louis Dominique met this gruesome fate in 1721. In the blowing from a gun execution, the condemned was tied to the muzzle of a cannon and blasted apart upon firing. This method was used in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly in colonial territories. The flaying punishment was a brutal method, especially practiced during the Assyrian era. Victims were skinned alive, suffering excruciating pain for days before dying from infection or blood loss. Live burial was one of the most terrifying execution methods in history. The condemned was trapped in a narrow box or buried in a pit, slowly perishing from starvation, dehydration, and suffocation. This ancient Persian torture method, known as scaphism, involved tying the victim to a boat, covering their body in honey, and leaving them to be devoured by insects. Death could take weeks, making it one of history's most excruciating punishments. Criminals were locked in a room filled with ashes, where the swirling particles were inhaled, causing slow and agonizing suffocation. This method ensured a painful and drawn-out death. This illustration depicts a physical punishment carried out in a women's prison in the U.S. during the 1890s. A female inmate is bound by her hands and feet, lying helpless as a guard mercilessly strikes her with a baton across her hips. At the time, prisons were not only used for confinement, but also as institutions of harsh and inhumane disciplinary measures, intended to reform inmates through brutal correctional practices. This 1912 illustration depicts a prisoner in an American prison being tied to a barrel and beaten with a wooden mallet. It was one of the many severe corporal punishments inflicted under the guise of discipline, showcasing the brutal treatment inmates endured during that era. Criminals were thrown before starving wild animals, left to be torn apart and devoured. This horrifying execution method was widely used during the Roman era, particularly as a punishment for prisoners, often staged as public spectacles in arenas. During the Roman era, criminals were forced into the arena to fight to the death. To survive, they had to kill gladiators in brutal combat. The winner occasionally earned their freedom, but most met a gruesome fate in the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. This metal fork was tightly fastened around the prisoner's neck. If they fell asleep or lowered their head, the sharp spikes would pierce their throat and chin, causing excruciating pain and forcing them to remain awake and upright. The Vikings' horrifying execution method, the blood eagle, began with slicing open the victim's back to expose the spine. The ribs were then broken and pulled outward, and the lungs were spread like wings, creating a gruesome and agonizing death. This execution method, used in Asia, involved the condemned being crushed under the feet of an elephant. With its immense weight, the elephant would shatter the victim's bones, delivering a slow and brutal death. Impalement was a gruesome execution method in which the victim was slowly lowered onto a sharp stake. Death was agonizing and could take days, making it one of history's most brutal and prolonged punishments. Skull crushing was a painful medieval execution method in which the prisoner's head was slowly compressed until their skull cracked and their eyes popped out. It was a gruesome and excruciatingly slow form of torture and death. The prisoner was executed by being submerged in a cauldron of boiling water or oil. Death was not instantaneous. The victim writhed in agony for an extended period before succumbing to the excruciating pain. The prisoner was executed by stoning, as a large crowd hurled rocks at them. Death was not immediate. It could take hours of agonizing pain before the victim finally succumbed to their injuries.
Thanks for watching. Like the video and subscribe the channel right now.